Well, hello and welcome to today's Q&A session with the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce on the implications of the conflict in Ukraine for local businesses. I'm Raj Kandola, Head of Policy at the Chamber. I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Now, many across the business community will be utterly dismayed by the unfolding events in the Ukraine right now. And of course, our thoughts go out to the people of Ukraine and their loved ones across the world whose lives have been utterly devastated by this crisis. At the Chamber, we're a leading business organisation that's on hand to help businesses trade locally and internationally. And throughout the coming weeks, we'll be working to connect our members to the latest intelligence on the emerging situation and support them in unpicking the implications for local businesses. We are working with our expert members and patrons to produce bite-sized briefing videos and resources on key areas like this one today. So today I'm delighted to say that we're joined by David Bailey, Professor of Business Economics at the University of Birmingham, talk about the potential impact on the automotive and electronics sector. David, thank you so much for joining us today. I think probably best to start off with a very broad-based question, but literally, what are the immediate implications for businesses in the automotive and electronic sectors, would you say?
Well, if I focus particularly on the auto sector, if I can. I mean, I think one thing, well, I'll go back a step. One immediate impact is we're seeing big increases in energy costs, both in terms of gas and oil prices, given the uncertainty around energy supplies from Russia and the Ukraine. So that's going to increase production costs. It is also going to contribute to the squeeze on living standards in the West, I mean, in the UK, but also in European countries. So we're going to see a further squeeze on living standards. So what that means is both a supply side and a demand side hit. So that's going to make life more difficult for manufacturers in general. I think secondly, we're seeing companies pulling out in some cases from the Russian market. The biggest UK export to Russia is cars. The West Midlands in particular has the highest level of exports of any UK region to Russia, and that is going to be largely around Jaguar Land Rover. Now, JLR has stopped selling cars in Russia, partly because it's the right thing to do, but partly because it's actually very difficult to put a price on cars when there's so much instability about the ruble. We're also then going to see further disruption to supply chains, given some critical components that are being impacted, like neon and palladium, increases in the prices of aluminium, and then also a knock-on effect on some of JLR's, for example, operations in Slovakia, given that some components may be coming from Ukraine. So, a whole range of supply side and demand side impacts, basically, even before we get into trade being limited by sanctions.
Yeah, and potentially exacerbating some of the issues that firms have faced over the last couple of years related to Brexit and the onset of COVID-19 as well. I mean, what considerations do you think businesses should have in regards to trading with Ukraine and Russia right now?
Huge uncertainty with both of them. There are issues around exchange rates. There's issues around whether you can still legitimately trade with Russia, and even if it's not covered by sanctions, whether it's the right thing to be doing. So businesses are going to have to look, I think, very carefully about whether trading with Russia is the right thing in the current environment, given what has happened. There's also, of course, going to be issues about the supply of components both ways as well. So supply of finished goods, supply of components, and also whether you're going to get paid. So huge sets of issues around whether you can continue to trade with both countries. I think one of the big impacts, I think, is going to be in terms of key components that come from Russia and also from the Ukraine. So just to give two examples, something like 50% of high-grade neon gas comes from Ukraine and Russia. That's used in the production of semiconductors. That is going to exacerbate the semiconductor shortage in the car industry. And we know that's been the key constraint on production. So that's going to have push that supply side constraint on the chip shortage even further. There's also going to be an impact in, for example, palladium, which comes from Russia, and how that's used in catalytic converters. So one of the issues for firms is looking at their supply chain and looking at second sourcing.
And finally, then, what do you think is the long-term outlook for businesses in these sectors in Greater Birmingham, given some of the issues that you've just highlighted there?
Well, we've actually got, this is just another issue for them to think about. You mentioned yourself that, we are coming out of COVID. There's the issue of Brexit. There's this semiconductor shortage. So it's yet another issue for them to think about. Longer term, I think that actually we're going to have to look much more carefully at decarbonising. We already know the direction of travel, for example, in the auto industry is towards electrification. I think what we'll probably see is much more of an effort to move that on more quickly so that we can wean ourselves off Russian gas and oil. So potentially an even bigger push into electrification of cars, for example, more quickly. Also, looking at, for example, how we decarbonize our houses. So, companies are going to have to think about how markets are going to change and whether they can reorientate.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's a really important point that you've made there, and ties again into some of the wider agenda we're seeing around sustainability, but also some of the work the mayor's doing in trying to secure the gigafactory for the region as well. But longer term issues around energy storage, which are becoming more and more prevalent as we move forward. David, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for
My pleasure.
It's been really helpful. As I said, from a chamber member perspective, please do keep in touch with your relationship manager on any questions you might have about the current situation and what you'd like to see in terms of lobbying points and advocacy from the chamber. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Many thanks.